Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Great Leadership. My guest today, Michael Weening, the CEO of Calyx. We're going to be going over a
Hi,
lot
Jacob.
of yes, hi. We're going to be going over a lot of interesting things today related to culture. There are a couple of news stories that I wanted to get your thoughts on as well. Before we jump into that, just a quick thank you to all the people who watch and subscribe to the show. It's been growing quite a bit over the past few months on Spotify and Apple. So if you've not subscribed yet, please go ahead and subscribe, leave a review. We get more amazing guests like Michael on the show. So, Michael, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to it. A great way to kick off the Memorial Day weekend.
Yes, indeed. So I mentioned I have lots of different questions for you, some news stories. I perused your LinkedIn profile. I put I got some interesting things that you've been posting online there too that I wanted to get your thoughts on. But why don't we start with Calyx first? Can you give us a little bit of background information about the company? What do you guys do? How many employees do you have?
We're an American company. We've been around for 25 years. Our founder, Carl Russo, founded the company around turn of the century. This is his third multi-billion dollar company. The last one he sold for 7 billion, the one before that for 2.
Wow.
And the journey that we've been on is that we were founded as a hardware company doing network systems for telecommunications providers, so cable and telco, right? And then over the last 13 years, I joined 8 years ago. We went through this transition. We lived our way through, I would say, the innovator's dilemma, which is how do you transition a company from what we were? We call it Red Ocean, was the hardware company into a cloud and software company. We're currently 13 years into that journey, about $1.3 billion invested into the transformation, and it's been very successful. When I joined 8 years ago from Salesforce, I did 4 years at Salesforce. I was at a big telco, Bell Canada, and then I was with Microsoft in Europe and a bunch of different places. When I joined 8 years ago, we were just starting that journey, and we were a smaller company, 350 million in revenue, investing a lot into the platform, not cash flow positive. And I'm proud to say that last year in 2023, we crossed over $1 billion in revenue. We've had 4 years of significant growth, cash flow positive, no debt, all those different elements. And how we did that is frankly by putting a platform in place for telecommunication providers that really allows them to transform their business through three things. They simplify their business through the power of the cloud, which is democratization. They excite and innovate where their subscribers, which is new services to help folks like yourself be very successful in the home office and small business. And then they really focus on their community, which is growing their community, which we're really proud to support them doing. So that's a little bit of who we are.
And how many employees do you guys have?
We're approaching 2,000.
2,000.
So when I
Okay.
joined, we were about 700, and we're now approaching about 2,000 people.
For decades, many parts of the US lacked access to broadband. But today, internet providers are connecting residents, small business owners, students, and entire communities, even in the most remote and rural areas. Calyx is at the forefront of this transformation. With their award-winning platform and managed services, it enables broadband providers to offer fast speeds while innovating new experiences for their communities. Calyx helps them support local economies, enhancing education, healthcare, and recreation, and keeping families safer. Discover Calyx at calyx.com. That's CALIX.com. So I wanted to talk a little bit about culture. I know that's something that's very near and dear to your heart. I think you wrote an article
Sure.
for Fast Company fairly recently. And there are a lot of interesting debates and conversations that are happening around culture. So why don't we set the stage with that first? And how do you define culture?
Well, that's a fascinating conversation because when you hear people talk about culture, they often talk about it as an it. Like,
Yep.
and I remember when I first joined, everyone was like, we're transforming as a company, but how do we retain our culture, right? They almost talk about it like this existential thing set off to the side that you have to retain. I have a very different view on culture, which is what I put in that Fast Company article, which is I really believe that there is no such thing as culture as a finite element. Culture is actually something that we define as individuals every single day. So if you and I are working together, Jacob, it would be, how I treat you every single day, how I treat my peers, how I treat my customers. And I think the best example of that is that how many times have you worked inside a team where everything was really great and then a new person joins or a leader leaves
Yep.
and it all goes to pot and everyone says we've lost our culture. Well, actually it's not. It's just that, that the people started to treat each other differently, they acted differently, they weren't strategic, and then everything went down the tube. And so when I think about accountability, I really focus on a couple of things. So first of all, as I say, culture is not it's a how we it's how we act and how we treat each other every single day. The second thing is I'm not accountable for culture. My leadership team is not accountable for culture. Every single one of us is. So stop, taking this victim mentality of saying, hey, the culture sucks. No, if the culture sucks, it's because you suck and you're doing the wrong things. And so if you want it to be a better place, be accountable, change your behaviors, call people out and act differently, right? And then it's about every single day, we use this term called better, better, never best. I did best practice that from Salesforce. In university, it's called plagiarism. In business, it's called best practice. So the better, better, best mentality came with me from Salesforce. And so the last part of that is constantly thinking about how each of us can make it a better place to work.
Better, better, never best. I like that. I like that mentality.
Well, that's why I stole it. So I love that topic. I love that saying. And
you didn't steal it. You created a best practice, remember?
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, best practice. Yes, yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned something interesting, which is this kind of you use the word victimhood in there, and this has been a very interesting conversation happening with a lot of leaders that I've worked with, whether it's CEOs or even chief HR officers. Why that word? So what are you seeing? What are you observing? Are you seeing more of this? Like what does that actually mean, and how do we get past that?
So I don't think we're seeing more of this, right?
Okay.
I actually think it always exists, and it's a cancer. It's like a virus or a cancer inside a business, and I think that it's just something that inherently exists with a percentage of the population. Not everybody, but the danger is that you can have a small percent who infects everybody else, right? Yeah. And then what happens is then to your point, everyone talks about victimhood, and there was this woman who once had a great saying. She said, when you build a process or you focus on a business, don't actually build everything about around the naughty 5%. Make it around the good 95%. So I don't want to say that everyone's a victim, because they're not. Yeah. But there is that small percentage who kind of infects everyone. And human nature is, I like to talk about bad things versus good things, right? And so that victimhood comment, and best way I'll give you a story. So we just did, at the end of every quarter, we're now doing this process where we just say stop, start, continue. Give us, we ask every employee, give us one thing each. It's a pretty simple thing, right? Mm-hmm. Give us, answer that. What's one thing we should stop? What's one thing we should start? What's one thing we should continue? Just to kind of get a pulse in the organization. And someone put a comment in, they said, well, the leadership team needs to be more engaged. And by the way, we're an all virtual company, 100% virtual. Right?
Interesting.
Yeah. And
we'll get into that in a minute.
The comment was, I was at the Connections event. That's our big customer event that we do every October. We have about 3,000 customers there. Okay. And they said, I was in the elevator and one of the executives came in and there were a couple Calyx employees there and he didn't even say hi to me. And he just got in, was kind of focused on the door, and then he left. And so I said, well, first of all, and I had an all hands after that. And I said, I want to openly address this, right? And we had 800 people on. And I said, this is BS, right? Whoever wrote this, you're just wrong. And here's why. Can you empathize with that leader? Because there's if it's me and I did it, hey, I'm sorry you felt that way, but why didn't you say hi?
Yeah.
Why? Why were you not accountable to just say hi? Did you say hi? And now, if you had said hi to me, if I'm that one who did that bad thing, if you said hi to me and I didn't respond, well, then I'm being a jerk. Fair enough. I apologize. I was I'm somewhere else. But if you didn't even say hi, that is a great example of being a victim. Say hi. And I said, just to contextualize what Connection's like, when you're presenting to 3,000 customers, you don't just, hey, here's Scott, here's my deck 15 minutes before, and then get up and do an hour and a half presentation. We've spent months preparing for that. When I do my keynotes, it's an hour and a half. I practice it like 50 times. I'm up at 3 a.m. the day before. Like I'm getting in, and then on top of that, I'm meeting all these customers. Like I barely have time to go to the washroom. So, if I was that guy who got in that elevator, think about my context too. And I think the problem is that too many of us just think about ourselves, which goes back to culture. Think about the person who's next to you. Think about what they're going through. And that's why it's really important that all of us, when we're on a Zoom call here, take a moment and to say, hey, Jacob, how's your day going? Right? Like, because it's not, try to put yourself in the other person's shoes because maybe they're having an off day, the kids are crazy, like whatever it is. Really, how do you get into that? And to me, honestly, I think you build great cultures if people just care about themselves or care about each other. Right.
Yeah, there's a concept in psychology called fundamental attribution error, which states that oftentimes when something isn't going, you familiar with the concept?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, okay. You can explain it for everyone else.
Yeah, yes. So the idea is that we are very quick to assume that when something doesn't go the right way, let's say, for example, you go to a restaurant, you order food, and the waiter is maybe a little snappy with you. We assume that it's a character flaw, a personality flaw, an attribute of the individual instead of the circumstance. So very rarely do we ever take a step back and say, well, that person might be having a bad day. Maybe they just got fired. Maybe their spouse is sick. Or if somebody cuts you off in traffic, we're very quick to say, you son of a bitch. You start screaming and cursing. You don't think, oh, maybe they're on the way to the hospital. So we always attribute the negative things that people do to their personality and attributes and behaviors instead of to the circumstance, even though the research shows that most of the time the issue is attributed to the circumstance, not to the person. And so I love the concept that you made, or the story that you shared of when somebody got into the elevator. I think we also see this a lot when we think about employee engagement programs, when we think about health and well-being programs. Because if as an employee, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not exercising or eating healthy, making time for friends and family on the weekends, you don't go outside. Right. If you just show up to work every day and say, oh, I'm not engaged, engage me. I don't have purpose, give me purpose. I am unhappy, make me happy. You're the victim because you're not really taking any accountability and ownership over your own life, over your own career, right? What are you doing? And there's so much. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you would agree.
Let me give you. So, by the way, I go straight to something else. So, I remember when I first became a manager. I don't know, it was 16, 18 years ago, whatever. And I asked all my new team members. I had 20 people on my team, and I sat down with each of them and I said, "Where's your career plan?" And none of them had a career plan. And I said to them, "Well, if you don't care about your career, why should I give a shit?" Was my exact words. Why do I care? Because, it's not my job, because that's the other thing too, is a lot of people think about my career. They're like, well, you're my manager, you should manage my career. Absolutely not. If you don't care about your career, I don't care about your career, right? So my job as a leader and a manager, if you're my team member, is actually for you to identify what your goals are. Now, if you can't identify your goals, I can help coach you and all that kind of stuff. Fair enough, right? But then when you say your goals, then my job as a leader is to really coach you and say, well, first of all, those goals are delusional or they're achievable, right? So for example, if you're a sales rep and you want to become an accountant, I might coach you that, hey, chances are you might be, you're not as detail oriented. You might find being an accountant a little bit difficult. But if you say, hey, I want to go do an operations role for 2 years just so I can expand before I go into this role. Okay, great. Let's go map it out and I work with you, right? And so I think my job is to help you out. But this is a great example is that if you don't, how many people I would love on this podcast, how many of you on this podcast actually have a career plan that you could articulate when someone says to you at all times? And for my entire career, I've always known exactly where I'm going. And that's just about goal centricity. Now, to go back to your whole attribution thing, there's a great book that my wife gave me years ago called The 4 Agreements. And one of them is don't make assumptions.
Yep.
And the wording on that agreement was, if you just take that one agreement alone and don't do the other 3, it will profoundly change your life. Because to your point, the reality somebody's in versus your reality is so different. Don't assume, ask questions, find out what's going on. And to your point, oh, I had my child is sick. I'm really worried. That's why I snapped at you as a waiter. Yeah. Okay. Then you're empathetic for the person.
Yeah.
Right? So
I agree 100%. How do you combat that? Because I'm finding more and more organizations are really struggling with this because, what happened during the pandemic is companies were trying to go above and beyond for their employees. I've talked to lots of organizations who were giving their employees salary increases regardless of performance. They were giving them perks and benefits, well-being programs, engagement programs. They were just throwing everything they possibly could at employees to keep them there. And on top of that, these employees didn't even show up to the office. And now post-pandemic, a lot of organizations are realizing, hey, wait a minute, like we skewed too much in the other direction. And now our employees are just showing up with their hands up saying like, you're supposed to do everything for me. You take care of my well-being. You take care of my financial planning. You take care of my health and fitness. You're responsible for my purpose and meaning. You're responsible for my engagement. I don't need to do anything anymore. And that, I think, is a very dangerous and a unhealthy culture to create. So how do you combat that?
I got to be honest, I don't see that. So
you don't see that for your
I
company?
actually think, for the leaders who say those kind of things, I actually find that there's a bunch of leaders who are very hyperbolic and actually are victims themselves. Right? Nothing pisses me off more, frankly, than a CEO who constantly whinges about the fact that my employees are entitled and all that kind of stuff.
I hear that a lot.
By the way, I'm going to say the same thing to the CEOs who actually bitch and moan about that. What are you doing as a leader to actually do the right things? Because you created that culture, right? You helped create that culture. So I'm sorry that your victimhood is because of the fact that you're in a position where you're doing it and you did it to yourself.
But
then
that's
what are you
the
going to
problem.
do to fix it?
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, but they did it to them. But they did it to themselves. And I
they
just
acknowledge that.
I think that's I know, but I think it's very cynical. I don't find employees like that. I don't have employees who are actually coming in and that kind of, and there's the occasional one who does that kind of stuff, but then it's just about having a firm conversation with them and saying, wait a second, like, this is a quid pro quo. It's a relationship. It's, no relationship, any relationship that's one-sided, one way or the other, right, is not good. And during the pandemic, we had some folks who were definitely, hey, I want to get like 100% raise, come getting this offer. And we're like, okay, go.
Yeah, you don't strike me as a kind of a CEO that puts up with a lot of bullshit, for lack of a better word. But I think
but I also really encourage people to have to also call me out, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I always say very frequently is I say, don't let me be wrong. If you think that I'm doing something wrong or that I'm a jerk or something like that, then call me, right? And I have an open door. I don't think, there's lots of people, I've been wrong all my life. Like that's how you learn, right? So, I've been right too, but there's been lots of things. My best learnings are from people calling me out. So call me out. And then I always say there's going to be a couple things that happen. First, I'll thank you for having the courage to do it. And I had someone an employee who sent me an email the other day about some stuff going on. And I thanked the person, really appreciated it, interesting feedback. But then I said to the person, I can't do anything with this because you're explicitly not asking me to go and talk to that manager. Yeah. So back at you, what are you going to do about it, right? How are you going to coach? Because they were complaining about a manager. And so they had feedback on a manager. And I said, go and reach out. And if not, go above them. Or here's what I would do. And let me know how I can help, right?
Yeah.
To complete the thought, if you call me and say, I'll thank you, and then one of two things will happen. If you're right, I'll go, hey, thanks. I never thought of it that way. You're right. I'm wrong. Let's go on. I don't really have my ego affiliated with being right because that would have crushed me 30 years ago. And then the other one is, if you are wrong, I'll explain the broader context because it's always about the broader context. Hey, you're living in your silo. You don't understand all these other things going on. I'll explain it to you. And then I'll take a step back from a company point of view and say, hey, do we have a communication issue? Right? And so I would really encourage those leaders to really, embrace talking to people, get out there. How many times are they meeting people? Are they doing town halls? Are they, are they on the front line fighting with customers? I'm fighting with employees to help customers. It's May. I've done 140,000 miles this year, and most of it is with customers and investors and being out to kind of understand what's going on, right? Yeah. So, if they see you beside them, I think your team members are going to, be open and get into that dialogue, and then you'll solve the problem, right?
Yeah, I think you've created that kind of a culture there, but so I was at an event fairly recently that I was speaking at, and then I had a meeting with around 5 or 6 executives in the HR space. And some of the companies that were present had hundreds of thousands of employees. And they were all saying this very same thing. And they acknowledged that they created this environment because they didn't push back. They didn't set clear boundaries or guidelines. They didn't speak up. They didn't have these open dialogues. They just kind of they were pushovers for anything and everything that their employees wanted. And now they're at a point where one CEO described it as they created a culture for children, and now they're trying to create a culture for adults. So they acknowledge that they did this, and now they're trying to figure out, what do we do as a result? And I think
then talk openly. Well, then get out there, talk openly, make sure that there's accountability. Like, I just do the things that I would have, I do the things that I would have wanted if I was an individual contributor and the kind of place I would want to work. Right.
Yeah.
And then, set your ego. If you're a CEO and you're in that place, why don't you set it? How about you actually set your ego aside, stand up in front of everybody and say, I screwed up. Because if you say I screwed up, then what you're doing is you're creating a permission-based culture that, if the CEO can say they screwed up, then everybody can say that they, screwed up. I screwed this up. There's some things going on. Don't use the bad words of, I think you're victims and you're whiny babies, like what they were saying. Say, we kind of have to shift accountability. Let's all pile in here. Let's really understand our purpose, what we're doing. Are we all committed to it? And then let's make this a great place together. Yeah. And I think that's what's always missing is that it doesn't matter if you're like Joe line manager or line employee or the CEO, this concept of if all of us want to make this a better place to work, it'll just become a better place to work.
Yeah. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable saying that. I mean, that's why I wrote my recent book, Leading with Vulnerability, because a lot of CEOs are very uncomfortable with acknowledging mistakes and talking about failures and challenges and stuff like that. So I think creating that kind of a corporate culture. So I'd say you have more of an accountability culture, it seems like, where, if employees,
100%.
And so I think that is what we need more of an accountability culture, which I think is a very, very positive thing. So how did you build that? I'm really interested in how do you create that kind of a culture? And let's say you were advising a CEO or an executive at an organization that doesn't have that culture. They have more of that entitlement. They have a little bit more of that victimhood. They have more of that, the organization should do everything for me, because those do exist. A lot of them do exist. How would you change that?
Well, so it's a little bit of a tricky situation, because the other part too is that, if you're in that situation, how bad, how much do you call it out? Right.
Yep.
But I would, and to your point is on your book with vulnerability, I read that and I agree with you. Like it's fascinating. It's not just CEOs. It's a lot of people if there's not a culture that allows these things, everybody doesn't come together. And if the top can't admit that they're vulnerable and they're not perfect, then everybody else can't either.
Exactly.
Right? So I would say the starting point is actually the CEO and the leadership team coming together and saying, hey, we all make mistakes. We're working together. We want to make this a better place. And then in partnership, like I also think people use HR wrong, right? Like HR partners in a lot of companies I've worked with, and I don't treat them this way. In fact, I think my HR partner, we call it talent and culture, not HR. And she's focused on talent and culture, and she's my partner. And together, we really put together programs that assist and educate and communicate and try to create a culture that's inclusive. But inclusive is like that the lower levels and the higher levels all come together and we're all working together. You know what I mean? And so if I had to go fix this, I would start by acknowledging, I think we have a culture problem, and let's start surveying everybody. Let's find out what's going on. And then on the CEO, get out of your glass tower, get on the road, get in the, like the most powerful thing that you can do is actually spend time listening to people.
Yeah.
Go meet customers, go do town halls, right? I remember when I took over an organization, I was in a company of 60,000 people. My team was about 900. And in my first 60 days, all I did was travel into all the different offices to meet all the different people. Now this was
listening to
back in 2000. Yeah, listening to her. And all I did was, okay, this. And then, that worked its way into my 90-day plan. So then, which comes the second point, what's your plan? What's your 90-day plan to actually build the business and communicate and change all of that, right? Which then leads into your bigger strategy. And then really think about how do you communicate on a regular basis? So we have multiple ways that we do this. Like every quarter, I have an all hands. In the all hands, we have an Asia presence. We also have the majority of our people in North America, but we do an all hands. And then right now, because we're going through a period of change, I'm setting up with my EA where once a month, I'm actually open up a coffee talk twice, 2 times in one day where different people can join. They can just ask me questions, just talk, right? All of my direct reports are doing the same thing once a quarter with the entire organization. Hey, come on and ask questions, right? Different people get different attendance, right? And what happens is that they start hearing all of the consistency from the leadership team, the messages, that openness to having a conversation, right? And that's how you start shifting things. But it's got to lead from the front. And don't, this concept of let HR do it. That's what's brutal, right? It's not HR's job. It's everyone's job.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that message. I think we need more of that. I think it's a very, very healthy message to give to a lot of people.
Well, by the way, that's why the CEO job sucks, right? Being a CEO flat out sucks. Why? Yeah. Because if you do it right, it's actually about all you should be doing is giving, and all you should be doing is being on the road with people, helping them, right? And that comes back to the first lesson I learned when I got out of university was this great salesperson told me this. He goes, invest in the success of others and you'll be successful. And so as a CEO, you've got to help your team members. You have to help your customers. You have to help your investors, your board. And if you do it right, it's the most thankless job you'll ever have, right? And
sounds
people
great.
who don't do that, it's a horrible job. Like I liked when I was president better because I had, the guy who's now our chairman, our founder. It was great when he was CEO because he could go do a bunch of the work and I got to do it. I ran the business. And so it was easier, but it's a hard job because of the fact if you do it right, you're always giving. And so there's a lot of CEOs who are very egocentric. Hey, bow at my altar and all that kind of stuff. If you're actually doing it right, it goes back to, it sounds kind of trite, but go back to the whole thing that happened in the 90s, all the books about servant leadership, right? I think some of the leaders I think a lot of people have lost that mindset.
Yeah, I agree. I interviewed Frank Blake. He's the former CEO of the Home Depot. And he said that great leaders do more and care more than everybody else. And I loved that kind of visual.
By the way, it's hard, right?
Oh,
it's, because you're always caring. And I heard a great story about the old CEO from American Express. And, he would always get in the elevator and he would start by talking, every morning when they were going to the office. This was 15 years ago or whatever. And he would, hey, how you doing? How's things going? All that kind of stuff. Like, when he's arriving at the office at 8 a.m. or whatever it was. So
yeah, one CEO that I actually interviewed, Penny Pennington, the CEO of Edward Jones, she told me that when she became an executive, it was very uncomfortable for her to talk to employees in the elevator. Like she was nervous. She didn't really know what to say. So what she would start to do over time is she would have, I don't want to call it exactly a script, but she had kind of like a pre-planned conversation when she would start the day and she would get in the elevator with employees, at least until she got to that comfort level where she would know what she was going to say and how she was going to talk about things and share what she learned. And until it became natural and second nature to her, she kind of would map this out before she would show up to work. And I think it's a pretty great little technique that a lot of leaders can do, especially if you start off.
Good on her, right?
Yeah, plan it, and now it's second nature to her. Now she, it's just who she is. But it didn't come naturally to her when she first started. So she.
Well, Jacob, it's like anything, right? Like it's practice makes perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, a lot of people go, oh, say to someone, oh, you're really great at presenting. No, I practiced, right? Very few people are innately just, we're born good at something.
I woke up like
everything. Right. Like Gladwell says, the 10,000 hour, whether or not you believe it or not, you need to practice. So, hey, if you're not really good at interacting with people because you came up with a finance background, which is more introverted or whatever, then, that's why we have Toastmasters and all the other things that you can do. So good on her.
My wife did Toastmasters very early on in her life. So I went with her when we first started dating in New York, she went to a Toastmasters meeting. I went with her to see what that was about. And it was a lot of fun. So yeah, there are lots of things out there.
So I'm, and I'm fortunate. I'm like, I always joke, I can make friends at a cardboard convention. So like, it's pretty natural to me to kind of do it. I've been in these situations all my life, but more because I grew up in the sales. Now, the humorous thing was that when I was in high school and junior high, I was very introverted, very,
Ah,
and um, and so it didn't come natural to me either. It wasn't until I was in university that I started to come out of my shell, and it became more natural. And then I chose sales, which is always about focusing on the other
for
person,
sure.
like,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
Sales is never about you; it's always about the other person. So you kind of learn that lesson, which is great training to be a leader, right?
Getting back to culture, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how extreme, is there such a thing as desperate times call for desperate measures? And the reason why I'm asking is, so the CEO of Bayer, I don't know if you saw this story recently. I think it's around 100, 120,000 employees. And he said that the company was going through a tough time. He wanted to restructure everything. And so for the 100, 120,000 employees, he said they were getting rid of all their mid-level leaders. And they were going to develop a new corporate structure where there were no bosses, and employees would get together in self-organized teams of there would be 5 to 6,000 self-organized teams. They would come together for 90 days to work on projects. When the project is done, the team would disband and they would go do something else. And I thought this was such an extreme approach to changing
Am I
corporate.
allowed to laugh? Am I allowed to laugh out loud?
Yes,
Because
yes, yes, yes.
you know,
And sometimes we hear this, right? We saw this with Holacracy. I don't know if you remember Holacracy with Zappos, which they ended up.
yes, I do. Yes.
And sometimes companies say we're getting rid of performance management, we're getting rid of annual engagement surveys. Right? They try to go to these extreme measures to make change,
Yes.
when sometimes you don't have to do that. So, what are your thoughts on change and how extreme you need to get to make that change happen?
So my expertise is definitely I'm a turnaround guy, right? So I have absolutely executed extreme turnarounds, right, and taken extreme measures. So
And I'm curious what the
even at
most
Calix,
extreme was after this. I'm going to ask you that.
well, and I have taken those extreme measures, but they were part of a plan, which is I've always believed, like if you've read, the first 90 Days by Michael Watkins, which is the book
Yeah.
that I constantly reference, and I've probably given
He's
away
been a guest on
2,000
the show a
copies of
few
it.
times.
Yes, and he was at Connections last year, and he's going to be at Connections this year for us, right? Really great, and we work with him a lot. And um, as you go through the analysis of where are you, right? So use a stars model. Am I in a turnaround, a realignment? That I think that's the first thing that really helps you determine what level of activity I have to choose, right? Like if I'm in a realignment, it's less drastic than a turnaround, right?
Yep.
But and then from that, what you do is you come from, okay, what's my plan? And the plan can't just be to survive the next 90 days, right? And I'll never forget when I took over a job during Bell. I joined Bell, and had been 5 years of decline in the division I took over,
Okay.
and I was 90 days in. I was like, I don't know, 45 days in, and I had someone say to me, "Well, why aren't you on deals trying to move deals?" And I said, because you've had 5 years of decline, and me just trying to move a deal for the quarter, I actually have to use my first 90 days to figure out what the heck's going on. And by the way, I was the fifth executive in 5 years, so that I could understand what the four executives before me who got fired, failed at, and why they didn't make meaningful change, and actually how to change this for long-term growth. And at the end of the 90 days, I sat down with the leader of the business and I said, okay, here's a plan that I mapped out over the next 2 years of 72 action items, which are short, medium, long action items and investments that we need to make to change the business fundamentally. And I said, and then what you're going to see is you're going to get progressions over time. Here's the metrics. And at that time, this was like my third or fourth turnaround. And I'm proud to say that that business went on to 14 quarters of double-digit growth and 25% revenue growth and all these other things after 5 years of decline. So we did it. But if you don't have that programmatic approach to it, and some of the things that we did inside that were radical, right? So for example, we had this one group of people. So the team was at that time, I think 1,700 people. And there was a group of about 45 people that added no value to the business. And I got rid of the entire function because it made absolutely no sense. And then took that and reinvested it in an area of the business that made more sense, right? And so in that case, it was this overlay function that was not aligned to the business. No one could actually come up with the metrics. It made absolutely no sense. I got rid of those headcount. Some of those people were repurposed because they had the right skills. and I put them into direct sales roles in the small business. So I think that you have to actually have a very clear view on where you're going. And then at some point, I always say, as you're going through that turnaround, there's going to be this period where you really question yourself and you're like, you know, it gets darker. It's like a storm. It gets
Yeah.
darker, the darker before the storm, before it breaks, right? And you
Yep.
are always going to face that crisis of leadership around, can I get through it? And am I actually right, or am I going to get fired? And if you don't have the firmest of beliefs that I'm willing to get fired to do this, and I will plow through, then you won't survive it, especially in
Yeah.
extreme situations.
Yeah.
And so, but that's not whipping the whole organization around. I don't see how that works.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, and what that bear said, look, I shouldn't laugh about that, because hey, maybe it'll work for him. I don't understand how this leaderless mindset works. I get how it would work in a startup of 50 people,
Yeah.
or
Not
100
100,000.
people. I can understand that kind of meritocracy based organization.
Yep.
But human nature, I'm sorry, like, just go back to biblical times. You know, if you actually take the Bible story of Saul, which is, you know, the story is they prayed and they said, we want a king, right? Like, people want structure and hierarchy and like that kind of thing. That's human nature. And so, you know, and by the way, what happens in that scenario when there's a tie? Like, on a
Rock, paper,
decision,
scissors.
someone's got to, like, who's going to be the arbitrator of the decision? Like, who's going to make the final call, right?
Yeah. No,
Where does the buck, by the way, where does the buck stop?
Yeah.
There's a reason why communism doesn't work.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. There's so much we could talk about there. My parents came from former USSR, so I have lots of thoughts on that.
See, I'm a Canadian. I'm a socialist, right? Although I sound like a New Yorker, but because that's, you know, I spent a lot of time, you know, going back and forth between the U.S. and stuff, and I've lived all over the world. But I do believe in socialism, but you know, I think there's even that, like, there's a balance here, right?
Yeah,
People need, you know, you need freedom, you need the flexibility to make decisions, you know, fair enough. But at the same time, you need someone who's going to buck stops here. And so I don't see how this merit-based no manager structure works. And it'll be fascinating to see if, boy, that's a gutsy move, you know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Something as radical.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. I wanted to transition to something you said earlier.
Sorry, I want to make one last comment.
Yeah.
My view on, you know, if you've read the Mythical Man Month, which is all around software and all the other things, right? They talk about how the more people into something will not lead to faster outcomes. I don't know how 6,000 people coming together around a project and then going on to something else. By the way, it takes you 90 days for them to get started. So I'm not sure how that ever survives.
For decades, many parts of the US lacked access to broadband. But today, internet providers are connecting residents, small business owners, students, and entire communities, even in the most remote and rural areas. Calyx is at the forefront of this transformation. With their award-winning platform and managed services, it enables broadband providers to offer fast speeds while innovating new experiences for their communities. Calyx helps them support local economies, enhancing education, healthcare, and recreation, and keeping families safer. Discover Calyx at calyx.com. That's CALIX.com. Yeah, it'll be an interesting thing to observe. But earlier you mentioned you're a remote company. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple things. So, you know, recently the CEO of Robinhood it came out, and they also told their employees they wanted to be remote. And now they're telling all their employees they want to come back to the office. And then there's a new trend that's being talked about now called quiet vacationing, where a lot of employees are not taking their full vacation time. They're scared to talk about taking vacation time. And so what they're doing in a remote environment is they're just taking their vacation time and just not telling anybody, and still kind of working a little bit, but sort of on vacation. So I'm curious to get your thoughts. One, on the whole work from home versus virtual side of things. So you're fully virtual, right? All 2,000 employees?
Yeah.
So no headquarters, no offices anywhere.
Well, no, we have those, but everybody works from home.
Okay. So what do you
we have a head office, we have a Minnesota office, we have a head office in San Jose, we have a Minnesota office, we have an office in Texas. You know, so we do have those offices, but we went all remote. Like, we've been remote since, you know, kind of 60-70% remote since 2016, and then at the pandemic, And actually I was really pushing on R&D during that time saying, hey, you guys should go all remote. And they're like, oh no, we can't. And then the pandemic hit, and I always joked with them. I would go into the San Jose office, and I'm like, okay, why is it that all of you are in Zoom rooms? Because the fact is, we have development offices in Asia, we have them in
Yep.
Minnesota, Texas, and San Jose. So they're all in Zoom meetings, anyways. I'm like, why are you commuting to do that? So I called Bull, and then the pandemic hit. They all went. I couldn't drag them back with whips and chains, right? So we're all remote.
So, what are your thoughts on kind of the virtual, remote versus in-person debate? Because there's a lot, obviously, of debate going on. You have companies, obviously, like Netflix, Goldman Sachs, Robinhood, and many others that are trying to get their employees to come back to the office. Meanwhile, you have a couple thousand employees. You're remote first. So, why remote first? Are you seeing any challenges with productivity, with innovation, with leadership development? And what are your thoughts just on this whole debate that we're seeing between office or virtual?
Yeah. So I think both have challenges, right?
Yeah.
So for example, why is everyone not talking about the fact that working in an open office sucks, right? Like I still remember, when I was a director and a manager in an open office, and I'm like, I can't have a private conversation. I hear everybody talking around me. Like I've always avoid like ever since I was an individual contributor, if they gave me an office, I would come in, I would show up, and then I would disappear because I would go back home because I could get 1,000 times more work done because of the
Yeah.
fact that I wouldn't have everybody dropping in and saying hi and all the other things. So I think, both extremes are hard and they have pros and cons, but I think you have to find the work styles. So I think hybrid work is a good one, right? I think people coming together is important, yes. So we end up investing more in travel than we did before, but
Okay.
we gain it back, from real estate costs. But so that's work. That's what works for us. Do we lose some productivity? Probably, right? But we also, I think, the productivity we gain. I don't really know anybody who works from home who doesn't work harder. And
Hmm.
so, I always worked harder in the home office than I did in the corporate office because the fact that I'm gaining 2 hours a day from commuting,
Commuting. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm not as exhausted, and it's easy up to sync up with people, and I'm not wasting time, and 15 people aren't dropping by. Like no one's dropping by in this home office because there's no one to drop by, right?
Not
And
yet.
so not yet. Well, my kids are gone. So I think there's pros and cons. I think your quiet vacation thing is fascinating, and my statement in that is that I would go back to leadership accountability. How many of the leaders are actually broadcasting out to everyone that they're taking time off?
Yeah.
And so what we do is we actually run reports on a quarterly basis of every manager and their employees on how many people are taking vacation, and we aggressively say
Hmm.
take vacation.
Interesting. Okay.
And so
Prioritizing.
and then I went on holiday uh like 3 weeks ago, whenever it was, it's all a blur. And I actually told my assistant to put my out of office on. I did not answer phone calls. And in fact, I put my work phone off. And, well, actually, no, I have my work phone. I would look at it once a day if I got a text. My EA knew that if there was an urgent something, she would call me on my personal phone to get me connected. And you know what? We all have this belief that we're that important. I'm the CEO of the company. We're $1 billion company. I'm not important enough. I had one thing that had to be solved, and really it was me. I just had to tell my EA who had to go deal with it, not
Hmm.
me do something.
So the sky did
And
not fall
so
down.
the sky did not fall down.
Yeah.
Exactly. We all think we're too important. I'm not, if I can say I'm not important enough that I can't take a week off, everybody can do that. And
Yeah.
so the only thing is you have to be accountable, back to accountability. So who's going to cover me? My EA covered me. My team members knew I was out. My out of office was on my email. So a customer knew that I wasn't being rude and not returning their phone calls. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a leadership thing. Leadership needs to say, hey, leadership, the first thing a CEO should do is actually tell everybody they're taking a week off and they're not going to do work. Now they're
Yeah.
permissioning everybody else to do that. And
Yeah.
so
I
if
think that makes
people
sense.
are doing quiet vacations, that frankly is a failure of leadership. Who's the jerk manager who's not giving them those people the permission and encouraging them to take time off? Every study out there shows that if you don't take vacation, you're not as good an employee.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree.
You're not as productive. You're not as creative. You're miserable. Like,
Yeah.
these people who wear the badge of pride that I never take vacation and all I do is work, they're actually never the
That's not
best
a badge of
employees.
pride. Yeah, that's not a healthy culture.
Well,
You
but you're
mentioned
also not, you're not necessarily the best employee either.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned inclusivity earlier, and so that made me think of DEI. And the guest that I'm interviewing a little bit later today is the department chair of sociology at Harvard, and we're going to be talking a lot about DEI. So, inclusivity, DEI, a lot of those, oftentimes those things go together. So, I'm curious to get your thoughts on DEI and what does that mean and how you approach it? Because as you know, in today's environment, we're seeing a lot of backlash against DEI. Something just came out even at UCLA where I think they were saying their DEI programs, a lot of the a lot of the people who've been graduating from UCLA's medical school, like half of them are not even able to do basic competency on medical exams because of DEI programs. We're seeing backlash in organizations, in universities. So it's a whole big mess around what we're seeing in the world of DEI.
Sorry, what university was it that said
UCLA,
they were graduating?
UCLA,
Well,
yeah.
okay.
So
Okay.
and
So,
again, people
so
can
wait, wait a second though. Let's just take your UCLA one.
yeah.
I call BS again, right? So who at UCLA who's running the programs for the medical state is getting fired for sucking as a leader and
That's a good
sucking as a
question.
professor,
That's a good
right?
question.
Like, who's firing the admissions persons for allowing people in who are actually not qualified? Who are the professors? And we all know there's a lot of good professors. There's a lot of horrible professors who have tenure.
Yep.
Who is actually holding the professors accountable for the people who went through their programs and didn't learn anything? What programs is UCLA putting in place to actually support their doctors or their doctor candidates to
Yeah.
go through it to actually come out as competent? Because the other part too is, look, my brother's a doctor and he wasn't the guy who had 99%, but he's a heck of a doctor. He was like, he was high 80s or whatever, but he had to work a lot harder than someone who is naturally 99%. But you know what? That person who's 99% isn't necessarily the best doctor because they may not be a creative thinker. And
Yeah. I
medical
mean,
is creativity.
the headline
So
actually that came out today, this was Daily Mail, which is, not a conservative publication, but it said half of trainee doctors at UCLA's prestigious medical school are failing basic tests after dean who's anti-white ignored affirmative action ban and terrorized staff with DEI rules. This is a Daily Mail, literally their headline. And so we're seeing a lot, and people can look this up. They can do their own research on this for what's going on with UCLA and lots of other, educational institutions or companies. But the whole point is that the whole state of DEI is a mess. A lot of pushback. People are fighting for it. People are against it. So I think it's really forcing a lot of organizations to take a step back and ask themselves, well, what does DEI really mean? How do we approach it? How should we be thinking about it? Is it something that we should be doing? Do we need programs around it? Or is it just kind of baked into how we think about work? So for you, obviously you mentioned inclusion. How do you think about DEI at your company? What does it mean? How do you approach it? Is it a big initiative? And what do you make of all the
no,
debate
it's
that
just
we're
got to
seeing?
be what you do. Like, by the way, inclusivity can't just be what color your skin is, what your gender is, right?
Yep.
Like, or what you declare yourself. It can't be that. It actually has to be inclusivity. Actually, has to be around how do we as an organization make sure that we're getting the greatest diversity of thought, of talent, of people, right?
Yeah.
There was a study that I wish I could find again from the 70s, I believe, from IBM, that actually, I think it was IBM, who showed that organizations that had females on the board, were much more
Oh
profitable.
yeah. I talked about that study in a previous book, and I totally agree. Diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, diversity of background.
But if you approach that, then what you're doing is you're aggressively pursuing those people in, regardless of gender, age, sex, color of skin, because you want those people in your company.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that mindset, and then again, if you have a mindset where leaders accountable and you make everybody accountable to get great people, and then if someone's more junior, to coach them up and help them out and all that kind of stuff, like, hey, you come from a very different background, I'm going to spend extra time to coach you up because I think you can get more of it. It's like interns, right?
Yeah.
If you no one would ever invest in interns if you actually did an ROI,
So do you think?
right?
Yeah, no, I agree. Should
But they require a lot of time and all that kind of stuff. But if you actually, one, care about your community, two, want to give back, and three, you actually want to try out a whole bunch of different people, give them an insight into your company, and then what comes out of it is some incredibly talented young people who have very diverse backgrounds and different perspectives, who then can come up and through your culture, and then you listen to them, right? Because they think differently. I'm 56, so I'm probably turning into that curmudgeon, right? And there's all these young people who have very different views than me, right? And if you listen to them and actually respect their views and contemplate it, well, then you'll constantly keep evolving as an organization. So I would just say it has to be in the DNA of your leadership,
That's just what I was
openly
going to ask.
embracing it.
If you think that it should just be part of HR, part of leadership, a part of how your organization views
Anything
people.
that's part of HR fails, right? Why it does.
No, I
Why?
totally agree with you. Yeah.
Because and by the way, talk to any HR leader. What they want to be is actually part of the team
Yeah.
and working together and all that kind of stuff. But so often they're pushed off to the side as just, oh, it's HR, and
Yeah. It's a
that's why
side
programs.
thing.
Well, it's when HR pushes a program on the rest of the organization, it always fails.
Yeah.
Right. And to your earlier point on, hey, we put out this new offer, this new program, this new whatever wellness thing. And how many of those things just went nowhere and no one uses them?
Oh, all the
Right.
time.
It's
All the
not,
time.
it's got to be the leadership team, the people all working with the talent and culture team to actually say what's best, what do we need, how do we work together? And when you create that, then all of a sudden the talent and culture team becomes part of the organization, making this a better place to work.
Yeah.
And it's got to be a mindset shift. Again, I would say that you have a lot of business leaders who go, that's HR stuff. I'm accountable for my piece.
Yep.
No, you're accountable for the company. Let's all work together. And if you care about the goals of the talent and culture team, who legit is just trying to make it a better place to work, then you'll get more out of it.
Yeah.
So this entire conversation goes back to, if people are just accountable for their behaviors, both CEOs and, the janitor and everyone in between, well, then it'll be a better place to work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like that approach. And I say the exact same thing in my books on employee experience and leadership too. So I love that.
Right.
We only have a couple minutes left. So speaking of books, I think it was a few weeks ago.
And here I was thinking that it's going to be hard to do an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody always says that. It always flies by. But you did a post on LinkedIn, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, about a book that I actually want to read called Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, which it sounds like you recommend, and it's been on my reading list, so I definitely want to check it out. And you shared a couple lessons from that book, and I wanted to go over maybe one or two of those lessons, because some of them, I guess in today's environment, maybe some people would find them controversial. And the first one was purpose, long hours, endless passion. Fighting through exhaustion becomes easy when unified by purpose. How do you, and so do you mean like the long hours, the endless passion, fighting through exhaustion? I think a lot of people, especially in today's world, when we talk about burnout and when we talk about engagement and stuff like that, a lot of people have a hard time with that. So how do you reconcile the importance of making sacrifice, of purpose, of long hours, of having passion, with the opposite side of that, which is I'm burned out, I don't want to work any more hours, I need my personal time?
Well, that's a great question. And so someone else asked me that about, I also was an advocate for grind culture. And it's kind of a similar topic.
Yeah.
And so while I don't necessarily agree with Elon Musk at all, frankly, I would never work for that guy either, but he is, those kind of crazy people will be the brilliant ones who go down in history, as he will, right? By the way, there's two books I'd recommend. That one, and I would recommend the book Rogue SAS, which is actually the same timeline, and it's about some very, very interesting people who broke away from British hierarchy to create the SAS. And in the end, were the ones who really overturned Rommel during the African War. You can also watch the TV show on Amazon Prime. It is flat out it's those two books basically. They all that came from Churchill, because Churchill also was the one who really encouraged these rebels in Africa to break away from the hierarchy of the British military
Yep.
and build up their entire own business, their own functions, right? And
I'm gonna check that
in
book out
Africa
too.
they overturned Rommel. So how do I actually? So first of all, in both of those scenarios, they were very purpose driven. We're very fortunate because in a lot of companies, perfect purpose is kind of this artificial wording to cover that we just want to make more money,
Yep,
right? And
exactly.
so we we are very fortunate because of the fact that the platforms that we build support our customers, and our customers are broadband service providers, and they really do, by creating connectivity in communities, they are doing profound things with our platform that, for example, helps bridge the digital divide for children whose parents don't have the money for broadband, and first responders, and they really do and they help small businesses, so they're really helping their community be more vibrant,
Yep.
which we say in our mission statement to help our customers grow their communities and their business. And so we're very fortunate that our purpose is actually our customers who are doing incredibly good works. So we glom onto the amazing purpose of our amazing customers, right? So we're very fortunate there. That is very encouraging, because if you're trying to make a decision on, I'm going to go work for a big company or go work for Calyx, when we talk about purpose, especially with the younger generation, they're much more purpose centric than I was when I came out of university. I grew up
Yeah.
poor, and I'm like, I just want to make money, right? I don't want to be poor anymore. So I think that they are really around a lot of interesting community things. Now, with regards to grinding it out and being exhausted, I go back to something that I've always lived by, which is nothing worthwhile is easy. And so, you know what? If it's easy, anyone could do it. It's not worthwhile. And
Yeah.
so, if you have a purpose and you have your goals and you grind it out, there are going to be those times where you have to set aside your personal stuff and
You
just
got to make
plow
sacrifices.
at it. You got to make nothing worthwhile is easy. And I
Yeah.
think that we shy away from that sometimes, and we
Oh
just
yeah.
need to be honest. Like I'm sorry. Like I've grinded my whole life. And there's been lots of times that it sucked, but I've also gained a lot of benefits from it because I had clear goals. I achieved those goals. And then to your point around exhaustion and burnout, well, exhaustion and burnout is what? Your own accountability, right? So if you're grinding towards those and you need a break, then are you taking the time off on your holiday? Are you communicating with your peers and making sure you have coverage? Are you actually recharging? When you go on holiday, do you actually turn your phone off?
Hmm.
Because so many people go on holiday and they don't turn their phone off.
Yeah.
You have to disconnect to
It's holiday and
recharge.
they're working through the holiday.
And then what do they do if you're a manager and you do that? And I had this guy Martin Baines, was when I went to go turn around the business for Microsoft in the UK. When I first joined, I was in my first 90 days, and I took my family to Portugal for a week off. And we'd only been there for 2 months, but it was August, so we went for Portugal, and the whole time I worked, right? And he said something that to this day, Martin Baines, it sticks in my brain. He goes, I came back and he sat down for the one-on-one, and he was one of the managers. And he goes, how was your holiday? And I said, oh, it's fantastic. We went to Portugal, the Algarve, it was great. And he goes, interesting, because it doesn't seem like you took a holiday. And he goes, and you know what message you just sent to us all? It was gutsy for him to say this. I said, what's that? He goes, you just proved you don't trust us.
Hmm.
Now, in that case, I didn't, because I was 2 months into the job and it was a disaster. Like the year before, the business I took over the year before, I think it was minus 16% year on year. So it was in
Wow.
terrible shape. And so I was there to turn it around. But that really stuck with me for my entire career, because in future dates, I make the point to disconnect. Like when I went on a week's holiday, I disconnected like flat out. No one could get a hold of me. And I told all the leaders, and I'm like, hey, by the way, this person's in charge if you need something. If it's
Yeah,
an
that's the right
absolute
approach.
emergency, like, right. So I think you have to be accountable. Take the time off.
Yeah, I love that. Well, believe it or not, an hour has gone by just like that. A fascinating
It was
conversation.
really great. I enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, I
So
know. We
thank
talked
you
about
very
a
much.
lot of really cool stuff. Everybody always thinks an hour is a long time, but we kind of flew through everything. Why don't you let people know where can they go to learn more about you, about Calyx? I know you post on LinkedIn. Anything that you want to mention for people to check out?
Yeah, if you look at Calix.com, you can look at our career site. You can see what we're doing from a purpose point of view. And you can LinkedIn with me. My name, I think there's only one of me on LinkedIn. Maybe I got some cousins. I think I have 100. I have like about 400 cousins. So I'm sure that somewhere there's another Michael, but I'm reasonably easy to find on LinkedIn. Michael
Very
Weening.
cool. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jacob. Really, really great conversation.
Thank you.
Have a great holiday weekend.
Yeah, you too. You too. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Great Leadership. If you get a couple seconds, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred channel is. And if you want to get access to bonus episodes and ad-free listening, you can subscribe to Great Leadership Plus on Apple Podcast at any time. And if you want more content, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter, thefutureorganization.com/newsletter, if you want to become future ready. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.